Welcome back. In a moment we'll examine the impact of climate change on coral reefs, but first here are some other stories to keep an eye on. Dozens of people have been killed after a Turkish cargo jet crashed in Kyrgyzstan. Most of the dead are residents of the village of Bishkek, where the Boeing 747 struck more than 40 homes. The cargo plane was on its way from Hong Kong to Istanbul when it tried to land in thick fog. South Korean prosecutors have issued an arrest warrant for the Samsung Group chief, Lee Jae-yong. Lee is accused of paying $37 million in bribes in the corruption case of President Park Geun-hye. And Gambia's president-elect, Adama Barrow, is staying in Senegal until his inauguration later this week. Yahya Jammeh is still refusing to step down following last month's election and has taken his challenge to the Supreme Court. The ruling is not expected until May. Until then, Jammeh insists the status quo remains. Coral reefs all over the world are suffering from the effects of global warming. They are important for marine life, but they provide food, shoreline protection, and medicines for mankind too. There are almost 800 species of coral reefs in all depths of ocean water around the world. This includes Australia's Great Barrier Reef, the Red Sea, and the Bataha Reef in the Philippine waters. Coral reefs within barrier reef systems are huge tourist attractions, many waters declared World Heritage Sites by UNESCO. The Philippine reef system holds the second largest coral reef area in the world, second only to Australia's Great Barrier Reef. Coral reefs are thought to be vital for marine life, supporting thousands of species, including about 4,000 species of fish. Without the coral reef, it's thought many of those species would be unable to survive. Well, Professor Graham Shilsjo is my guest. He's from the University College of London's Geology Department. So this is a worldwide issue, Graham, in terms of it's not just Australia that's facing this challenge. Other sites in the same sort of latitude are also facing a challenge too.
Yes, because corals exist in this symbiosis in quite a narrow temperature window. This is a worldwide problem. I mean, global warming is, after all, global, and so this is a global problem.
But also a factor in terms of the chemical makeup of seawater and the balance between acid and alkaline. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's often overlooked, but global warming has an evil twin, and that's ocean acidification. As we're pumping up more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere from fossil fuel burning, we're actually changing the pH of rainwater. We're also changing the pH of the surface ocean, and that can change much more quickly than the whole ocean, and the corals live in that surface ocean. And for calcium carbonate to precipitate, and that's what corals are made of, we do need an alkaline ocean and not an acidic ocean. So the more acid we put into that surface ocean, the more difficult it gets for corals actually to grow their skeletal framework.
Right, so in ideal circumstances, the ocean is slightly alkaline.
Yes, normally the pH is about 8.2, but we can measure the pH going down year by year because of the carbon dioxide that we're actually pumping up into the atmosphere.
And is this uniform across the ocean, or does the chemical makeup depend on where you are in the world and other factors?
There are slight differences from place to place, but the pH will be decreasing all around the world in the surface ocean. Yeah.
This augurs rather badly, doesn't it then? Because that means the twin attack of global warming and this acidification means that the likelihood of these coral reefs are just not going to regenerate or continue to survive.
I think on the long term, the acidification problem is worse than the global warming problem, because to some extent, corals can adapt to higher temperature. The symbiotic algae can be replaced by other symbiotic algae, and also there are cooler parts of the ocean which can then have corals, because those areas would be getting warmer. So to some extent, the global warming issue might be manageable in the long term, but ocean acidification is a totally different issue. That's a chemical issue, and if you change the pH of the ocean, then it really does become very difficult for any organism that precipitates a calcium carbonate skeleton to actually continue doing that. Not just corals, but also other things that have these kinds of shells in the world's oceans.
And it seems fairly obvious to say you're not going to be able to affect the chemical balance of an ocean very easily. I mean, what can man do? Nothing, really, can they?
Well, the only thing we can do is to have less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's really the only thing. Yeah.
And that, which is also argument about carbon dioxide as a factor in the global warming. So attack the global carbon dioxide production, and actually you'd solve both problems at a stroke, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, absolutely, and the quicker the better.
There are those in the scientific community, though, who say or not you particularly, but those who worry about coral are crying wolf, that it isn't such a big problem, and they point to some examples where coral has either regenerated or it's adapted and so on and so forth. What do you make of those arguments?
Well, to some extent, they're ignoring the acidification part of the argument. A lot of people are focusing on the global warming, that temperatures are rising, and we need to keep temperatures below a certain maximum threshold to avoid problems to biodiversity, etc., and desertification. The focus is all on the temperature, and to some extent we have had temperature fluctuations over geological history, and organisms are able to adapt. But this is not the case for ocean acidification, and it's a double whammy. They're both caused by carbon dioxide, both caused by fossil fuel burning.
They come back
so if you solve one, you'd also solve the other. So
okay,
I think they're overlooking the main problem.
The hard-hearted might say, okay, well, it's a very nice bit of the world, but so what? You know, we like making CO2 because we like the lifestyle we've created for ourselves. What, apart from the loss of natural habitat, what other factors do you think the coral reefs provide us with?
Well, you already said in your interview that the enormous biodiversity that we can enjoy in the barrier reef. They're the rainforests of the ocean, and just like we don't want to destroy our rainforests because of the amazing biodiversity there, we really don't want to destroy the oceans too. There are all sorts of benefits that we get there, like tourism, but also there are things that we're still yet to discover for medicine, etc.
The medicine does claim, doesn't it, that some of the scientific experiments are done as a result of the habitats and the animals and so on that are found in these areas?
Yeah, absolutely. And the oceans are relatively unexplored compared to the land areas. They're places where, you know, it takes a long time to study all the different diversity of the oceans, the algae, the bacteria. So many things haven't even been discovered yet. And that means there's also medical chemicals that can be used, like antibiotics, that really haven't even been thought about yet. And we could destroy before we even find...
What, the raw materials to find these new developments or new inventions are right there?
Yeah, yes.
And so you'd argue need to be preserved?
Well, they need to be preserved because we don't know what is being destroyed. That's the thing. Just like with the rainforest.
Oh, it's a potential, I see, that's being destroyed. Okay.
I mean, there are people that are finding things even now, but there are other things which are potentially...
We talked a bit about how the United Nations, UNESCO and so on have agreed to protect Australia. Are all the coral sites that you would think are remarkable worth preserving, enjoying that protection now?
Certainly not, actually. The Great Barrier Reef is a great example of a protected area, but many of the reefs of the world that live and grow in those latitudes, they are not protected. And I would argue, actually, the reefs which need protecting are probably the deeper ones, the ones that are not necessarily related to the symbiotic algae that we're talking about, the beautiful ones that we can enjoy and we can snorkel and dive through. But there are deeper ones which are much, much more slower growing. And once they are destroyed by, you mentioned dredging, then they won't grow back quite so fast.
Is the argument difficult to win then, that these places deserve protection, or is it just?
I think it's very difficult because of the population of the world. The population is increasing.
Commercial considerations come into play, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. The amount of fish that people eat, and those resources that we also need because of the growing population.
Well, thank you very much indeed for being with us today, Professor Graham Shields-Joe from London's Geology Department of the University College of London. Thank you. Now, we end the programme with our Insight Bite. This is a little something that we feel you should know. At 128 years old, the French authorities say the Eiffel Tower is in desperate need of a makeover. Arguably one of the most famous landmarks in the world, it draws up to 7 million visits a year. When the site was built in 1889, its engineers were not expecting it to last forever, which is why Paris has announced plans for a $318 million renovation. The refurbishments will improve security on the site. reduce the long queues that visitors have to endure as they wait to get in, and offer some protection for those prospective visitors waiting right now in the rain and snow. Building work's going to take place over the next 15 years or so. It will be discreet, say the architects, so you won't notice any structural changes in the monument. The planned refurbishment is intended to bolster the French capital's bid to host the 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And that's all from me for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.